Welcome, everybody, back to the Citizen Soldier Podcast, reporting live here from Tucson, Arizona at Hack Studios. I'm your host, Scott Paulson, and this right here is not a warning anymore, people. This is a reality check, and this city is changing, and not in a way that benefits the people who live here or work here or raise families here. And you can feel it, especially when you step outside at nighttime around here. You can see it in the neighborhoods that used to be quiet. And you can hear it in the stories of people who live here. The fentanyl has always made its way into the veins of this city. And it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was brought here, moved here, and distributed here, and allowed to take hold because systems are too strained. You know, the priorities are misaligned, and it's too many people have been conditioned to look the other way. And this is what happens when pressure builds and nobody addresses it head on. You know, Tucson sits in a critical corridor, and that means what flows through doesn't always stay, but enough of it does to cause serious damage, especially this fentanyl. You know, it's about infrastructure, people. You know, it's about networks that move product quietly, efficiently, and consistently. You know, they're your neighbors. They blend in like ticks. You know, and it's about individuals who exploit weak points in communities and systems. And it's about the long-term consequences that hit neighborhoods first, not politicians, not executives, not people sitting behind some desk, but regular average Tucsonians. And you start to notice patterns when you stop ignoring them. You know, the same cars showing up at odd hours, the same houses with constant short traffic. You know, it's the same old stuff, man, especially growing up in Southern California in the early 80s and 90s. I seen it all, you know, so a lot of people say you can't judge a book by its cover, but I do believe if you've seen that cover a million times, you kind of know the book, kitty. But it is what it is, you know, and the difference between a community that declines and a community that stabilizes is whether people acknowledge those indicators or pretend they don't exist. You know, and let's talk about the corruption here, because that word gets thrown around, but most people don't break it down in a real way. You know, corruption doesn't always look like dramatic headlines or courtroom trials. You know, sometimes it looks like just regular day-to-day deliveries from Amazon. You know, sometimes it looks like decisions that prioritize appearance over results. And sometimes it's policies that sound good publicly, but, you know, create gaps that get exploited privately. And it is a travesty, as I always say. And when those gaps stay open long enough, people, the people step in and use them. And that's when communities begin to feel like they're on their own. And that feeling is dangerous if it leads to chaos, but it's powerful if it leads to discipline, because the truth is, waiting around for someone else to fix it isn't a strategy. It never has been. And this is where the citizen soldier mindset comes in. Not reckless behavior, not confrontation, you know, awareness, structure, discipline, people. You know, a citizen soldier is someone who pays attention when others don't. You know, someone who notices the patterns, someone who documents, who communicates, who builds connections with people around them, because disconnected neighborhoods are easy targets, but connected ones ain't. And it's that simple. That's the reason why these cartel people build their own communities, so they can block anybody who is legit out. And you get to know the people around you, not just casually, but internationally. You know, you build communication lines, you share information, you stop living like strangers stacked next to each other and start functioning like a network. Because when people communicate, things don't slip through the cracks as easy, and you add visibility, cameras, lighting, presence, and not out of fear, but out of awareness, because criminal activity, it thrives in blind spots. So the more visibly you create, the harder it becomes for that activity to operate unnoticed. And when something doesn't stand out, you document it, people. Times, dates, descriptions, not assumptions, not guesses, but facts, people, because facts matter. Facts are what create accountability. And facts are what move things from being ignored to being addressed. And, let's be clear, this is not about taking the law into your own hands. That's how situations escalate and spiral out of control. But, this is about using the tools that exist, applying that pressure, through consistency and refusing to let legitimate concerns disappear. That's why reporting matters, my friends. If you need help, contact hackstudios@yahoo.com to get your stuff going. Get your word out. Get the message out. It's all in a professional digital age we live in. Capitalize on it. And, let's go ahead and talk back about that fentanyl crisis going on, because this is where the urgency comes in. This isn't like other drug waves. This is definitely different. It's stronger, cheaper, and more dangerous in smaller amounts, because that changes everything. It means the margin for error is absolutely gone. It means one bad decision is going to, be permanent. And it means the impact, it's spreading faster than people are prepared for. And communities need to understand that reality. Parents need to understand it. Young people need to hear it directly, not filtered, not softened, because pretending it's not happening doesn't protect anybody. Awareness does, people. Come on, Tucson. You also have to understand that the people pushing this aren't thinking long term at all. This isn't about sustainability, it's about volume. And that's why the damage feels so rapid, because it is. So what does pushing back actually look like in a real grounded way? It looks like awareness turning into action. It looks like people paying attention to their surroundings, and it looks like communities organizing, communicating, and refusing to let the patterns go unnoticed. So, it looks like this is going to be showing up for a lot of people. You need to start speaking up, speaking out against this, and be consistent, my friends. That's the only way we are going to save Tucson, because consistency is what changes outcomes. Not one-time reactions, not emotional spikes. Consistent awareness, documentation, and pressure, my friends. And here's the part a lot of people don't want to say out loud, because this city is not beyond saving, but it is going to require people to stop being passive. It's going to require people to stop assuming someone else is handling it, because it's not. Nobody is. Nobody's coming to save us. Our government is baby-eating pedophiles. I mean, what can you say? I mean, we're doomed. We have to save ourselves and our communities, and not through force, not through chaos, but through discipline, my friends, awareness and connection. Because once communities start functioning like that, things change. Activity gets noticed faster. And patterns get identified quicker. Pressure builds where it needs to. And slowly that balance starts to shift. And, it's not about fear, people. It's about clarity. It's about understanding what's happening and deciding not to ignore it. Because ignoring it, well, look what it's doing. It's what allows it to grow. It's going to keep growing. And Tucson right now is at a point where decisions matter. not just leadership, because we see what the mayor's doing, walking in circles. Oh my God. It's a travesty, as I say, living here, and the direction this city goes will depend on whether people stay disconnected and passive or whether they're going to step up and stay aware and build something strong at the ground level. This is where it starts, people. Not tomorrow, not next year, right now. And this isn't just Tucson's problem either, but this is our ground. This is our neighborhood and our responsibility. And you don't fix this overnight. You fix it by staying aware and connected and refusing to let your community fall apart piece by piece, people. Pay attention, document what matters, and speak up when something isn't right. Build your circle. Your strength comes from people who stay disciplined and refuse to look away. Because the moment people stop paying attention, that's when everything slips. But as long as there are citizens willing to stand their ground, stay sharp and hold the line, people, because this city still has a fighting chance. Once again, reporting live from Hack Studios in Tucson, Arizona, this is Scott Ryan Paulson, the Rooster of Tucson, waking you up. Once again, stay alert, stay ready, and hold the line, my friends. Tucson needs you.